On a quiet night in 1989, long after the applause faded and the cameras shut down, Paul Hogan made a decision he would spend the rest of his life trying to understand. It wasn't a decision made on a red carpet or in a courtroom. It happened in silence, behind closed doors, when he chose to walk away from one life believing another would finally bring peace. By then, the world already thought it knew the story, the laughter, the charm, the unlikely global icon who seemed untouched by doubt. But what almost no one saw was the pressure closing in from every side, or the way one relationship slowly became the axis on which everything else would collapse. This is not the story of a career rise or a box office phenomenon. This is the story of a hidden moment when certainty replaced caution, and the cost of that certainty followed him for decades. Hogan never needed an introduction. By the late 80s, his image was fixed in the public imagination, confident, grounded, almost immune to Hollywood's usual chaos. That image became both his shield and his trap. Behind it, his private life was straining under a tension it was never built to survive. Fame had given him reach, but it had also narrowed his margin for error. Every choice was louder now, every silence more suspicious. The relationship that would define this chapter of his life began under conditions that made honesty difficult from the start. Working closely, living under constant scrutiny, existing inside a pressure cooker where personal and professional boundaries blurred, Hogan found himself leaning into something that felt stabilizing, at least at first. There was comfort in being understood without explanation. There was relief in being seen as more than an image. And perhaps most dangerously, there was the sense that this connection arrived at exactly the moment he needed it. Publicly, it looked inevitable. Privately, it was anything but simple. The attention surrounding them grew quickly, and with it came a narrative neither of them fully controlled. What was genuine affection became headline shorthand. What was private doubt became public speculation. Hogan, who had built his career on timing and restraint, found himself reacting instead of deciding. That shift mattered more than anyone realized at the time. There is a moment, often overlooked, when momentum replaces intention. People rarely notice it while it's happening. Hogan later described a growing feeling that events were moving forward whether he approved or not. Choices began to feel like confirmations rather than beginnings. Once that happens, stepping back feels less like caution and more like betrayal. That is how pressure disguises itself as destiny. When he finally left his first marriage, the reaction was immediate and unforgiving. The image of the grounded everyman cracked overnight. Media coverage hardened into judgment. Fans felt entitled to explanations he could not give without hurting someone. Silence, which once protected his mystique, now looked like avoidance. Reputations are fragile that way. They aren't lost in one moment, but in how a moment is interpreted when no one fills the gaps. What followed should have been the calm after the storm. Instead, it was the beginning of a different kind of strain. Away from the frenzy, Hogan expected clarity. What he found was distance. The dynamic that once felt supportive began to change once it no longer needed secrecy to survive. When a relationship is built under pressure, release can reveal fault lines that were invisible before. Hollywood has a way of amplifying imbalance. One person's fame can become the other's shadow. Hogan's success, once a shared asset, slowly became a point of tension. Every setback was magnified. Every comparison unavoidable. It's hard to sustain intimacy when the outside world keeps score, and even harder when the numbers never reset. I've always thought this is where the story turns from romance to reckoning. Not with an argument or a scandal, but with the quiet realization that love alone doesn't resolve everything it disrupts. Hogan has sacrificed stability believing meaning would replace it. Instead, uncertainty followed him into the very space that was supposed to feel safe. As years passed, the public saw less and less of the man they thought they knew. Interviews became careful. Appearances grew rare. Behind that retreat was not bitterness, but exhaustion. He had learned that explaining himself only created new versions of the same misunderstanding. So he stopped trying. Silence returned, but this time it wasn't protective. It was heavy. The marriage endured longer than many expected, but endurance is not the same as peace. The emotional distance widened slowly, without spectacle. By the time the end came, there was no dramatic implosion, only a quiet conclusion that felt inevitable in retrospect. When the divorce was finalized, it barely registered compared to the scandal years earlier. That contrast says everything about how public attention works and how private consequences linger long after it moves on. What followed for Hogan was not reinvention, it was reduction. He stepped back from the industry, from visibility, from any role that required pretending he had answers he no longer trusted. Health issues emerged, compounding the sense that time itself had become an adversary. The man who once embodied ease now moved carefully, deliberately, as if each step carried memory as well as weight.
In rare moments of reflection, Hogan admitted something striking. He didn't frame his past as betrayal or victimhood. He framed it as misjudgment. That distinction matters. It suggests a man who understood that the most consequential mistakes are often made without malice, driven instead by hope and fatigue, and the desire to believe a solution has finally arrived. There's a temptation to flatten stories like this into morality tales, to assign heroes and villains, winners and losers. But real lives resist that simplicity. The truth is quieter and harder to sit with. Two people can enter the same moment carrying different needs, and both can leave changed in ways neither intended. Accountability doesn't always come with clarity. Hogan's later years have been marked by restraint. He doesn't revisit the past publicly unless asked, and even then, his words are measured. There is no attempt to rewrite history, only to acknowledge its course. That restraint feels earned. It also feels lonely. Fame rarely teaches people how to live once it stops being loud. Sometimes the most revealing part of a story is what doesn't happen next. There was no public feud, no tell-all, no late-life redemption arc designed for applause. Just a man living with the knowledge that one decision reshaped every relationship that followed it. That kind of awareness doesn't fade. It settles. Looking back, the hidden moment isn't the beginning or the end of the marriage. It's the point where Hogan stopped questioning the speed of his own life and let momentum decide for him. That's the moment most people recognize too late, if at all. When intention yields to inevitability, consequences stop asking permission. If there's an uncomfortable truth here, it's that success doesn't protect against emotional miscalculation. In fact, it can accelerate it. Hogan had resources, admiration, and freedom, but none of those guaranteed wisdom. If anything, they insulated him from friction until friction arrived all at once. The public will always debate what really happened, who gained and who lost. But the quieter question lingers beneath all of it. When the noise disappears and the roles fall away, how much of who we become is shaped by the choices we make under pressure, and how much by the ones we avoid making at all? If this story stayed with you, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who appreciates the quieter side of Hollywood, and subscribe to Hollywood Unsealed for more stories that live between the headlines. And ask yourself this: when the moment comes to choose between certainty and caution, how do you know which one will cost you more?